We probably can start. We understood that some people come a bit later, but we'll start. It's 11:30, so let me introduce myself. My name is Milica Pesic. I am Executive Director of Media Diversity Institute, which is a London-based organization with sister organizations in Brussels, Yerevan, South Caucasus, Belgrade, Western Balkans. All we do is based on freedom of expression, which we see as the right for all citizens to enjoy, regardless of our race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. We work with the media, we work with civil society organizations, we work with the academics, and since recently, since we set up a Media Diversity Research Center, we hope to work more with the policymakers. So that's about Media Diversity Institute. I want to introduce my guests my panelists before I introduce the topic. So we have Miazia Schueler next to me, who comes from AI for Forensics, or Forensic. I never know whether to put S or not, who is specialized, as you can see from the very name of the organization, in all these AI things we are all still learning about. Then we have Gary Younge, should I say former journalist, because you can't be former if you're a journalist. You are a journalist once, you're always journalist. So journalist and academic, professor at Manchester University, and author of several books. And we have, at the end, very end, Verica Rupar, who is also former or journalist, who was academic till recently, journalism professor at Auckland Technology University in New Zealand, and who is now running the Media Diversity Research Center in Media Diversity Institute. So my panelists will help me answer some of the questions. As we all know that big techs such as Meta and other social media have been increasingly contributing, or consciously or subconsciously, to the polarization, which social or cultural or political, at the expense of minority groups, marginalized communities, vulnerable communities. As we also know, they prioritize through their algorithms, through their business models, again, contributing to the further marginalization of minority communities. So it seems that whatever they use, either clickbaits or divisive content or sensationalism, it is to further contribute to this marginalization of different communities which exist in every society. So we are here to answer some of the questions related to this very complex relationship between big techs or digital platforms, freedom of expression, and the very survival of diversity in the media and public space. So my panelists, and I hope you too, will help us answer some of the questions, such as, has diversity become a dirty word? Can journalists contribute to more inclusive society, more cohesive societies, and how to do that? These are just some of the questions. And I thought maybe we can start by actually defining what we mean by diversity, what diversity means to each of you. And I'll start with you, Miazia. Where are you? When I say diversity, what comes to your mind?
Excuse me. First of all, thank you so much for having me. So yes, my name is Miazia. I'm half German and half American. My name is Ethiopian. I'm not Ethiopian, but I suppose that I've spent a good chunk of my life being called exotic, and at the same time as, you know, a black girl growing up in Germany, people always ask, oh, where are you from? Where are you really from? And then when I go to the US, I'm not fully American. So I've always kind of spent my life and figuring out my identity in terms of also what I am not. So for me, that's still a very hard question to answer, but ultimately, to me, it's an acknowledgement of my identity, it's an acknowledgement of my cultures, it's an acknowledgement of my history, it's an acknowledgement of my people, and it's not only acknowledgement, it's showing respect and being inclusive of my perspectives.
Thanks, Miazia. So I hope you are now thinking yourself, when you hear word diversity, what do you mean by that? So let's go to Gary with the same question, Gary.
To me, to me it means substantial and substantive difference. So it is possible to have an organization or any kind of body that looks different but acts the same, in which case it's really no use to me. Diversity to me means things that don't just look different, that's photo opportunities, but actually act differently, because that would suggest equal opportunities. And I'm minded of an interview I did with Angela Davis, the African-American radical, and she talked about a model of diversity that is the difference that brings no difference and the change that makes no change. And I think it's important to insist on that, because otherwise you end up with people saying, look, we have a black face in a high place, or a woman in a high, so then we've changed. And it's like, no, you've changed the participant, you haven't changed the game.
Thanks, Gary. Verica, what's diversity for you?
Because I don't have one. For me, diversity is communication principle, and I became triggered by the question of diversity during the Yugoslav wars in the 90s, where the difference in ethnicity, religion, political orientation became a trigger for social polarization. And since then, I have been writing about that, but also researching on that. And if we think what diversity actually means, it means facts, conditions, and practices of involving people into social actions, social processes, regardless age, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, etc. But it can be a dictionary definition. Yes, facts, conditions, and practices. But we all know that diversity has many other meanings. So it is, diversity is demographic marker. You know, you have a census of population and you have percentages, how many of these ethnic people, members of the ethnic community are here, how many there, etc. So it is a demographic marker. The word diversity is also used to refer to representation of these different groups. And we talk about diversity in media. We talk who is present, who is absent, who talks, who doesn't talk, who talks, but talks in a different way, who is cited by full name, professional orientation, age, etc., and who is cited only by the first name. So it's a representation of diversity. Then we have diversity as a policy, and that's what we are seeing now in the States, how that is scrambling, falling apart, basically. And these policies differ in different countries. So we talk about interculturalism, multiculturalism, assimilation, and various other civic engagement, which I think might be the exit for solving the issue of not respecting human rights, marginalizing different groups. And we have diversity as an ideology, as belief, as a system that has to be set up to ensure that there is equality. Sorry for this a bit academic intro of that, but it is a personal interest in these matters that really moves me to try to unpack what is there.
Thanks, Verica. Maybe we can just ask, is it possible to have one more microphone, please, so that we don't pass microphone all the time between each other, because this is going to be conversation much more than just presentation. Let's stay with Verica, because you mentioned you've been doing all this research related to these dashboards and polarization related, to marginalized communities at the expense of marginalized communities. What are the main findings you can share with us? Then we move to Gary, who was correspondent for The Guardian for years from America and can talk about Britain and Europe. He lives in Britain, but also America, where all this diversity, equality, and inclusion scrapping is coming and like swapping the world. So, Verica, what have you found in these studies or research you've done yourself?
I would like to talk about two projects, and there is a huge time span between two of them. One study that I have done was on reporting ethnicity and religion in Europe in 2012. And instead of doing what majority of academic and similar studies are doing, looking at monitoring basically media to see how ethnicity and religion was covered, we turned around the things and talked to journalists writing about ethnic and religion groups to check what is their knowledge and understanding on fundamental rights framework for the beginning, and to ask them what stories that they wrote or so that their colleagues wrote were the best coverage of ethnicity and religion, and what were the worst coverage. And when comparing that coverage, we came up with some results. What could be done to improve reporting on these issues? And it was interesting to see how the north of Europe differed from the south of Europe. In the North European countries, now I forgot what they were, Denmark, Finland, and Estonia, I think, the knowledge and understanding of fundamental rights framework was much higher than in the south of Europe. But in terms of journalism practices and what works and what doesn't work, that's what Gary and I were talking this morning. What works is full engagement into a community. If a journalist does not approach the story as one-off event of asking questions, getting answers, and leaving the community, then the coverage can't be substantial and comprehensive. And the best coverage was work of journalists who would spend time, sometimes, some cases, as undercover reporting, pretending to be the member of that community, and then experiencing firsthand what was happening there. That was one study, and the other one, more briefly than the first one, is a recent study, that, one of the first study of newly established Media Diversity Research Institute, and that was diversity in media in algorithmic age. And with a colleague, Santiago Bracho, we looked at the European Commission funded projects over 2 years that touch upon diversity issues and try to find out what are the trends. What is the thing that the European Union considered to be relevant to financially support to improve the position of minority groups? And so we looked at 30 projects, not representative in any sense, but 30 projects that satisfied some criteria, and found out that almost all of them approached not a single diversity issue, not dealing only with ethnicity, but dealing also with ethnicity and gender, ethnicity and religion, and so intersectional. We found that majority of projects were based in Italy and Greece, and that is understandable because of the wave of migration, etc. What else did we find? We find that many of them were community-based, so the objective of the project was not to change national politics, but to come up with some recommendations that might influence national politics. They were more oriented toward the local, because that's where we experience our belonging and our identity. And we all know that it's never a single identity. You know, I am a woman, I am small political opposition member, I am this and that. I am a non-native English speaker that I experience personally the most these days, regardless being living in New Zealand for 20-something years. The main finding of this other study that you can find, now I am promoting MDI, that you can find on MDI website is that there, and I'm sure Miazia will talk more about that, the importance of raising algorithmic awareness and understanding. And some of these studies, some of these projects didn't talk about that.
Lots of promotion of MDI. Thank you, Verica. Gary, as I already said, scrapping diversity, equality, and inclusion policies started after the new president was inaugurated in the US. National Public Radio, Google, Amazon, Meta, they already scrapped the policies. Why they are doing it is the wave coming to Europe. And just before we start, I want to quote Sarah Williams, who used to work for Meta and was one of the close collaborators of Mark Zuckerberg, who wrote almost incognito a book about Meta, where she says that this organization is a diabolical cult able to swing elections and profit at the expense of the world's vulnerable. Gary, the floor is yours.
So when it comes to, in a way, what's happening in America is quite instructive in a range of ways. And primarily what we see is that DEI, as was, both for and against, was a political, it was an essentially political move. It was a political move to have it. If we look at what happened after George Floyd was murdered, where a range of organizations decided that they needed to be more diverse racially, or after Me Too, or any of these things, that they were pushed by politics. I'm a product of this, that I got a bursary from The Guardian to study journalism, which was a response to the riots in Britain in the 80s, where black people were in the news, but they weren't in the newsroom. So the Scott Trust, which owns The Guardian, decided that they should encourage the training of minority journalists. I got my column the year of the Macpherson report, which was a report into the murder of a black boy, Stephen Lawrence, in Britain. So these things move with politics, and they move forward with politics, and they move backwards with politics. And this is a political move. If we look at the rhetoric of this administration, then particularly, but not exclusively, xenophobic and anti-black racism is part of that agenda. So there is a logic. The good thing about that is that, or the promising, or maybe the one hopeful thing in this is if we change the politics, we get it back. But we have to stop thinking of DEI as being somehow moral or feel good or whatever. It's a political thing. And it's a political thing to rectify historical injustices. There is all of the studies on DEI have shown that white men do not suffer if there is DEI. That there is no, and yet that is a thing that is evoked, particularly white male victimhood, and it's a fiction. When it comes to, is it coming here? Well, the thing is that not that much DEI came to Europe in the first place. And Europe, we have to stop looking at America as though racism is an artisanal product that America produced, right? Like Parmesan or champagne or something. Like, actually, America comes out of Europe. If you wanted a previous iteration of Donald Trump, it would be Silvio Berlusconi, a man who spent too much time on a tanning bed, who was sexually incontinent, who was very rich, and indulged in a great amount of illegality. We, as a continent, didn't have a whole lot of diversity initiatives to start with, so you can't stop something that you never started. So I've always struggled with Europe's sense of superiority when it comes to America and race, not because there is not a lot going on in America, but because there is an insufficient amount going on in Europe. And I think the last thing that I would say about America, which is always important to bear in mind, it was a slave state for several centuries. It was an apartheid state for 100 years. It's only been a non-racial democracy for 60 years. If my children want to know about segregation, they can ask their grandfather, who's African American, who grew up with all of the signs and so on and so forth. So non-racial democracy is a very new concept in America, and we shouldn't be surprised that it is fragile.
Thanks, Gary. Miazia, what you do is what we understand as auditing of big techs, but if you can give us a bit more and particularly talk about the successes, whether it's working, and the DSA, Digital System Act, whatever you call it, is it working, and what are the results? Successes primarily.
So I'm a researcher for AI forensics. When I came into research, I started off looking into politics and identity and history within different digital cultures, specifically with a focus on Black and Indigenous communities, mainly from a feminist and decolonial perspective. From which then I kind of moved on to what we call algorithmic oppression, which is how I came to AI forensics. AI forensics is a small European nonprofit organization, and we investigate influential and opaque algorithms to hold the platforms accountable. So what we do is we develop tools to take a look at these platforms, which we call auditing. So we collect evidence, we collect the data to then conduct investigations. And that's my job. I develop methodologies to look into this data according to certain research questions, to then expose the violations and harms, and try to escalate that to a policy and advocacy level, and ideally to inform regulation. We work with a policy framework. It's the Digital Services Act. I, for example, mainly focus on Article 34, which says that very large online platforms and very large online search engines, meaning platforms or search engines that have a minimum of 45 million users across Europe, are obligated to mitigate certain risks regarding illegal content, election integrity, gender-based violence, the protection of minors, mental health, public health, which we haven't done too much on yet. And with that in mind, we look into, you know, recommender systems, we do feature audits, we see if the platforms actually, or if their policies are sufficient to protect against these risks. We look into ads, we look into content moderation. And we do this across various platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, Google, but also LLMs like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot. But we also look into porn platforms. And our work in the recent years last year was an election year across the globe. And our work focused very much on elections and generative AI. For example, we looked into French parties and found that right-wing parties in France, you know, strategically incorporated AI-generated imagery into their campaigns, you know, with stereotypical representations of, you know, immigrants and anti-European sentiments, and just used very emotive images and terminology. I'm sorry, am I taking too long? No, okay.
I have a question, you know, because we are doing something similar as MDI, monitoring how big platforms, you know, what content is there, and then we try to get them to remove it. But how successful you are, that the research is obviously good and has results, but do they react? Because they sign these codes of conduct with the European Commission. Do they react when someone goes to them, AI forensics or the European Commission? Do they remove it? How they react? What do they do?
The platforms?
Yeah.
So it depends, because success can be measured differently. And not every project is the same, right? A project on election integrity won't be the same as a project on gender-based violence. A project on ads won't be the same as the next. So it's all quite different, and success is measured differently. Success can mean, you know, a successful collaboration with other civil society organizations, with journalists, with policymakers. It varies. We've also had, you know, situations where our research has led to a litigation process. However, we cannot rely on only one factor for success. And success can also mean, you know, a change in the platform, which has also happened. And when we can see, okay, what they've changed their content moderation strategies based on what we wrote about, then that, of course, is a success. But ultimately, what I'd like to call for here is that with our work, our goal is to be loud. Our goal is to reach people, which is where journalists come in. And so, what I want to call for is that we need to work together on this. Be it we work together from the beginning, or if you jump in towards the end when we have our finished report. We just need to make sure that we're all on the same page to really show how these platforms are systemically, you know, integrating discriminatory practices that affect so many of us, and they need to be held accountable for that. And at the same time, I think, it's our job to work together to facilitate a more inclusive digital tech environment, as well as normalize not to use technology when it cannot be made fair.
Thanks, Miazia. Gary, what can journalists do? If we are talking about we have to do things together, there are different stakeholders, media organizations like legacy media, big platforms, civil society organizations, academics. Which way we should go? What do you say? What do you think we should do to stop what's happening and really make it that there is diversity there, and it should be then reflected in the media, yeah?
I think the first thing is to understand that diversity as such, and here I'm talking about the full range of diversity, class, race, gender, sexual orientation, all of it, region, isn't some add-on that you do to make you feel good. It actually is the basis under which you either do your job well or you don't. That as an organization, organizations that are not diverse and that operate in diverse societies, and every society is diverse in one way or another, organizations that are not diverse run the risk of being irrelevant. And so for just the sheer issue of relevancy, it's important to understand that this is actually part of your work. And then, tautological as it would sound, is then the next thing is for journalists to do their job. And their job, to do the cliche, isn't to say, well, one person says it's raining and another person says it's not raining. It's to put your head out of the window and see whether it's raining. And so to actually go and see, and we are not, or should not be, stenographers for the powerful. That if Donald Trump says they're eating dogs in Springfield, Ohio, then it's incumbent on journalists to see if that's true, but not just to say, well, he said they're eating dogs. That's not good enough. That without some kind of verification, and this becomes incredibly important in this moment, where making statements matters more than the truth. Where actually there used to be, I think, politicians have always lied, but there used to be some shame in the lying. Now it's just part of the game. And it's really important that journalists don't play that game, that they don't transmit or amplify those lies. And then that we work with those organizations within civil society that are working towards transparency, democratization, and in defense of pluralism. One could say the fact that pluralism and diversity has been politicized doesn't mean that we should try and avoid it so that we remain neutral. There are some things that actually you don't want to be neutral about. Human rights is one of them. And so it's our job. It's our job. And in defending those principles, we actually defend free journalism and a free press.
In 2018, we, Media Diversity Institute, had a panel here at the festival titled Fascism is Back. Is media part of the problem or a solution? Are we journalists doing the right thing when we talk about representing, portraying diversity? You said yesterday when we were planning this, and we talked about identity policies and politics, it's good to start there, but not to end there. Where is solidarity today when we talk about different communities?
Yeah, I mean, my view about identity is that it's an inevitable place to start. Right? We all come from somewhere. The more powerful you are, the less likely you are to even realize you have an identity. That's the truth. So, as nobody's ever asked me, when did you realize you were straight? Because straight people don't get asked that. When I was a foreign correspondent, nobody asked me, how do you balance being a father with being a foreign correspondent? Because men don't get asked that. And so we have to start from the best. So people who say, all of this identity, everybody comes to everything with their story, right? If I were born 100 years ago in Bengal as a woman, my understanding of the world would be different. Our identity shapes, it doesn't define, but it shapes how we see the world. So it's an inevitable place to start, but it's a terrible place to finish because that's where fundamentalism lies. I am black and that's it, or I am British and that's it. It's a form of, of nationalisms, big and small. And that works, I think, for absolutely every identity, including whiteness, including masculinity. And so our job I look at identity as being a little bit like the gas that you put in your car and then you have to drive with everybody else. And you have to be aware of everybody else. We all come from somewhere, but we all kind of more or less, well, we all definitely end up in the same place, which is 6 feet under. But we are all kind of, hopefully, moving towards not the same idea. We could all have different ideas, and diversity is as important in ideology as anything else. But the solidarity comes in connecting our experiences and understanding that we can be the counterpoint in others, that I'm a straight person, but my experience of being black in Britain is enough for me to have some sympathy, some empathy. And actually, you don't even need that racial experience because humanity should be enough. We have that. We understand pain, we all cry, we all laugh, we have families, and so on and so forth. That should be enough. And it's a kind of, the thing I ask for, because that can all sound very mushy and kumbaya, is a militant form of humanism, where it's not just that we understand that we have a common humanity, but, and it comes back to my original point about substantial diversity, that we act on the basis of having a common humanity.
So what we have in common to start with and end with. Verica, what's your advice or view, what journalists should be doing? And then based on all your research, policymakers.
Just to go back to what Gary said, that we start with identity but shouldn't end with identity. At the time of anxieties and fears and political tension, there is a strong temptation in all segments of society to sameness, to be a member of the group. And that's what we are experiencing now, and that's what politicians use as a tool. And with Trump, it's obvious. Talking all the time, let's make America great again, and here are us, and those are them who we will push beyond the border, who will do this and that. So it's a process. In theory, not in theory, our aim should be common good and common understanding and universal human values. But in time of political tensions, it collapses, and it's a circle, not one that triggers the other. It's a circle. It goes into circle. History, thanks God, shows that it passes as well. So I hope that we will come to the point of solidarity again. What could we do? So what we were experiencing in analog world, when we didn't jump into digital era, were the same thing that we are seeing now. So we were looking at newspapers and we were seeing how they marginalize certain communities. We found biases, stereotypical reporting, etc., etc. All the things that Miazia was talking about as part of her project in the digital sphere nowadays. So the difference between two eras is that now it's faster and on a larger scale. That's the main danger. What I think, I might be very wrong here, is that there is no way that we can go back. There is no way. It's a large scale and it is fast. So maybe what we can do, we can shift the focus And instead of, so in one historical period of time, we were talking about sources of news. And by analyzing that, we were seeing who is doing a good job as a journalist and who is not doing. Then we moved to diversity of content, to see what is there. And now we are doing still, and we have to do, analysis of the media content, being digital, social platform, mainstream media, etc., to identify these processes and trends. But I think after these two, we have to move towards thinking about and finding lessons from analysis of diversity of exposure. So it's there, these discriminatory languages, biases, hate speech, etc. It's out there. What do we do with that? And at the end of the story, it is the audience, or at the end of the story, it's citizens that we should take care of. I mean, what is journalism? I don't think that the main principle of doing journalism work will change or should change. It's working in public interest. So if we are working in public interest, let's then see how people engage with this content and export.
Gary wants to comment on some of what you said, and I'd like Miazia to come into discussion.
It was really just, hello. It was really just that I thought of a concrete example which relates to here and both in America, which immigration, migration is a big thing. Italy knows about immigration. It knows about migration. Italy was a net exporter of people for centuries. It shouldn't be so hard to make that connection. America is made of immigrants. Donald Trump's wife is an immigrant. Elon Musk is an immigrant. Donald Trump's grandfather, I think, was an immigrant. So it's not so hard, and that's what journalism can do. It can evoke those connections. It can, it can draw those lines. In Ireland, where there is now the beginning of an anti-migration movement, and their slogan is "Ireland is full." Ireland has less people in it now than it did before the famine. It's the only European country or Western country where the population is still lower than it was in the mid-19th century. It's not true. But also, Irish people know migration. So it's the ability to portray, convey, connect. It's there. What's lacking quite often in the journalism is the will. And so instead, they act as stenographers for the powerful. They go with the dominant conceit, as opposed to actually stepping back a little bit, just a little bit, and saying, well, actually, we've seen this before. But when we saw it before, we were on the other end. We were Italian immigrants. We were poor. We were Catholic in Protestant countries. It's not that difficult, but it takes will.
As this editor of a Polish paper in London, so Polish immigrants who live in Britain, when I asked him how you have a column in your paper explaining, to your readers how British media see Polish people. So what do you say? I don't speak Polish, I know about that column. How do you explain to your readers why British media portray Polish plumbers the way they do? He says, I tell them, you know what we do to the Ukrainian migrants in Poland? That's what they do to us here in Britain. Miazia, you are not a journalist, but you work with policymakers or European commissions. So what are your advices, which way to go? And then I'll open the floor for at least a couple of questions from the audience before we finish.
So I suppose my advice is to, it sounds so plain, but my advice is to listen, and I can't speak for journalists. I can only speak out of my own experience, but as a researcher, there's a certain obligation to be neutral, right? But it's a very delicate balance when you're investigating technologies, in my case, that are simply not fair. So I think that there's also an obligation to acknowledge that by taking a neutral stance, if I were to take a neutral stance on technology, knowing what I know, I'd be complicit, right? If you look at fascism, there is no neutral stance to fascism, right? There's fascism and then there's anti-fascism. There's no in between. So what I'm calling for here is that there's educational value in what we do, and by being loud, by saying what we have to say on these issues, we foster an environment of better understanding each other. In my case, it's, you know, tech literacy, and I urge everyone to talk about it, to read about it, to learn about it, so that we can end a cycle of, you know, ultimately of
Tech literacy.
Yes.
Thanks. Well, let's start with the questions, if there are any questions from the audience for any of our panelists. Yes.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm from I teach on a programme in Bolton, UK, which is, I have a very sort of diverse demographic of both sex, gender, race, mostly sort of working class. They have to work a hell of a lot of part-time hours while studying. So this is an issue really close to my heart. But I'm just sort of like, I'm curious about your kind of perspectives on that like new wave of DEI that came after George Floyd and Me Too. Because we sort of talk about it as if, I don't know, it was like a little bit uncritically, I think. And it's not just Trump that rolled that back. You know, people were defunding and deprioritising like those initiatives way before Trump, right? So how, like, if that was the sort of proton of DEI in the newsroom, how do you think it's been going?
Do you want anyone particular from the panel to answer the question? Because we have 3 more minutes till the end.
Anyone really? Maybe Gary, like you used the word sort of
Gary, our star. Go on.
Substantial diversity. So how substantial do you think
Gary.
it really has been?
After George Floyd, it was incredibly performative, right? Everybody made statements. The Walmart DEI that's been rolled back was introduced then. So we saw that it was flimsy. We shouldn't expect powerful people to provide us with our liberation. So when these things happen, it's up to us to sustain them. It shouldn't be, but that's where the politics comes in. And that, I think because that Black Lives Matter moment burned brightly and then faded, there was no organization, there was no institutional structure, then it allowed people to say whatever they wanted to say, to sound like they were Martin Luther King's heir, and then just to shut up and withdraw it as soon as. So this is where the politics comes in, that this is not just an HR thing. To make it work, we have to apply political pressure, and that political pressure has to be sustained. They will do what we make them do.
Gary,
Freedom is
Miazia, do you want
taken.
to
Yeah,
go
freedom is taken, not given, is what we say.
Well, we have 1 minute, so I'd like to wrap up with like last sentence, each of you, and that's it for today. Miazia, do you want to start? What would you like to say for the end?
I would like to say that in my case, I just want to reiterate that we need to be loud, and that, you know, we can achieve this best by collaborating. If anyone wants to collaborate on anything regarding, you know, algorithmic oppression, you know, reach out to me. I'm always happy to set up a call.
Be loud and come to Miazia.
Yeah.
Gary?
Everything we've got, we fought for. If we stop fighting, we lose it. When we fight, there is no guarantee that we'll win, but there is an absolute guarantee that we will lose if we don't. So we have to keep fighting.
Keep fighting. Be loud. Verica?
Keep fighting, be loud, and let's not forget that the diversity is related to human rights. And it is about equality, solidarity, that opens the door for a brighter future.
Humanity. Fight for humanity and be loud about it. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you. Thank you.